as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well then, thank you everybody for joining us again here at Barcelona Metropolitan. As you know, we're always looking to add value to the English-speaking community and people who are interested in moving and buying homes here in Barcelona. And we're continuing with our series on how to, get, find, negotiate, and avoid common mistakes when you're purchasing property. And we have an expert with us, Raf Jacobs, who's been very kind to share his professional insights. He'll go over a little bit more about his background and the very practical nature of today's webinar. We're going to be really excited to take lots of notes, as he had suggested, and don't be shy. Ask your questions because you're going to have an expert for free today. Raf, with that, if there's anything else, please let us know, and we're looking forward to starting today.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Victor. And again, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. A few practical things before we start. So we have 1 hour for this webinar. If there's more questions, I'm happy to keep going afterwards. But I'm not going to speak for a full hour, I think. So I'll open up for questions at the end. But there is a Q&A chat box in Zoom, and you find it somewhere at the bottom of your screen. Please look for that. We will post some messages in there every now and then. If I talk about some articles or interesting content, we might drop a link in there. So have a look where you find that Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your questions there. When we move towards the end of the session, of course, you can open up your mic. Of course, you can ask your questions as well directly. It's a webinar for you, so please don't be shy, as Victor said. For those who don't know me, in my day-to-day life, what I do is with Inspire, which is my company, we help people take better decisions. We help people buy properties in Spain, evaluate them, negotiate the best prices, do the proper contracts, give legal guarantees, technical inspections, prepare everything to go to the notary, mortgages, but also very early on, just have initial discussions with people on what is possible. Can I actually buy in Spain? Where should I start? Developing realistic expectations, a feasible plan, validate a plan before starting. So that's why I do my day-to-day job. I teach as well at university in Barcelona as a professor in the real estate executive master program. The topic I teach about there is exactly how you accompany buyers. So I Inspire, we don't sell properties, we help people buy properties. And that's very different from all the thousands of agencies you find everywhere on every corner in Spain. And that's because there's no regulation in the market that anyone can sell properties, basically. So we don't do that. We help people buy, invest, take the right decisions, and avoid mistakes. I also speak for, or as a go-to person for property. Been appointed by the City Council of Barcelona for the international community. So they run every now and then sessions or expat weeks or days, interesting webinars. Again, as independent advisor for people who want to buy or to rent. So this webinar is part of a series which you might have heard of. We are at episode 6 already today. We did 4 episodes last year, second part of last year. Did one a few weeks ago where I speak about the market predictions, what's happening with the prices, what should you do, when should you buy, when you find the best prices, what to watch out for. All these past webinars are available on our blog, which you see the link there on the screen. You can watch them again, listen to them again, and there's more webinars upcoming as well in the next week and months. We do this because from my point of view, we need to help you take better decisions, informed decisions, and therefore my point of view is I want to share knowledge, experience that we have from our day-to-day practice with people who might be thinking of buying a property or investing in a property, which is different from publicity. We don't do publicity. We say let's just share our knowledge and see if people think this might be value for them. There's a you find on our blog a lot of information for further reading on market trends, my opinion on real estate in Spain. So on Idealista, La Vanguardia, different sources. If you like reading, have a look at them. They're fairly short articles in general. And the webinars I mentioned, you see them here. Uh, there's one on the impact of COVID on the property market. I think that was this from last year, a lot of interest on that webinar. There's one on the buying process. So what steps you need to go through as a foreign buyer in Spain. Episode 3 is on mortgages, specifically if you might be a resident or non-resident in Spain, but still if you want to finance your purchase. What about that? There's one in Spanish, there's one from the City Council. Episode 4 was about buyer dilemmas, rent or buy ready to move in or to renovate, invest on the coast or in the center of a city. Buy cash or with a mortgage. That's episode 4. Episode 5 was earlier this month, the predictions for this year, and today we're at episode 6. I try and use a lot of real life examples, very practical examples, and I try to put them into a broader context. A context. I'm an economist by training, but just from my view on the market, from how the property market works in Spain, what do these examples mean? What could they mean for you? What what could you learn from that or do with that? Um, People ask us, and I clarify this before we start, and then we jump into the core of the session. So who do you work with? Who are your customers? So some people think it's a wealthy buyer. Well, no, it's not a wealthy buyer. It's a very diverse range of people we support. We see an increase. We have seen an increase in the last 6 to 8 months of very young people. People, let's say between 28 and 38 years old, first time international buyers who often have been renting so far in Spain, make the switch to owning a property. Um, but there's clients who buy properties for them to live. Other people buy to let, so an investment property. Other people then who are non-residents, typically they want a second residence in Spain, often in either Barcelona city or the coasts. Can be very south in Spain as well. Um, so different types of age groups, different types of profiles, and certainly different types of purchase budgets. And we work a lot now with people looking at properties between 160,000 and 300,000, let's say, to 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 define kind of a range, and it's fairly low. And that means people with savings around 45, 50,000 euros start buying, and we start supporting them in the search, evaluation, and so on. But equally, there's people who say, no, I want a lifestyle house or a luxury attico, and they pay 1.5 million for it. So both groups exist, but we see an increase in the first time international buyers, younger buyers coming to the market, which is not a surprise. It's one of the things I think if you look at the article on Metropolitan I wrote in April last year, one of the things I expected at that point in time was that more young people would start buying properties, because after a crisis, that group is often the first group to move early on the markets. And yeah, so no more about it. If at the end, if we have time and if you want to, many of those people, I've asked them, would you mind summarizing in 2-3 minutes what you would like to share with people that are in the same position as you were 6 months ago? So you wanted to buy, you didn't know yet how to buy, lots of doubts, you were renting, etc. What have you learned during that process, and what would you like to share with other people? So that I can play that 2 or 3 minute video at the end if you want to. That's really up to you. So for me to know who is, because it's a virtual meeting, we did this on site in person in the past in nice locations in Barcelona. That doesn't work anymore now. We're going to run a quick poll. You get a pop-up message on your screen with a simple question. This helps me. This is anonymous, first of all, but this helps me to understand who you are, what your profile is, and to pick specific examples during this webinar. You'd see a pop-up message now. And so the question is, at this moment, I feel more like renting. And sure, that should be continue renting, not continue buying there. The first question, there's a typo. or you say buying is maybe better for me. I know I want to buy, but I still have loads of doubts. Where I see a lot of people indicating that part here. Um, or you're already actively searching for properties to buy. That's another option. So have a look, please, at the options and let us know. This helps me to hopefully make it more relevant to you and pick better examples. Let's see. Um, so what do we see? Most people have responded. Thank you for that. Um, there's not many people who say that they feel like renting or continue renting, which is logical because the title of the webinar was from renting to owning. Um, okay, and then there's a mix between all the other different answers. So thank you for that. Okay, so we're gonna close this poll here. Then what should you know about the property market in Spain? And this is like the 1 minute summary of some of the other webinars. Today and this year, housing prices are lower than a year ago. That's because of COVID, because of the economic recession. Mortgages are cheaper than ever before in Spain, meaning interest rates are at historic low points. And Euribor is negative, nearly minus 0.5. Um, makes the cost of a mortgage lower, means that you pay less interest back to the bank, becomes cheaper to buy. You can either, therefore, maybe buy a better property, afford more on the property, or but you also pay more capital back sooner because the interest is so low. Interest component is lower, so it's a clear buyer's market today. That is good in general, but at the same time, we also see, and that's a warning sign, a lot more bad properties on the market presented as bargains. In a crisis, some people need to sell. They have an urgent need for cash, and the agencies are not regulated. They work for the seller, for your counterparty as a buyer, and they don't have the obligation to inform you about potential problems with the property. So there's watch out. We see more of these properties. It's not because it's cheap that it's good. The cheap might turn out to become very expensive in the future. Okay, so an opportunity, certainly if you're renting, an opportunity to switch from renting to owning a property. Therefore, stop wasting your money, if I may say that. In many cases, it's wasting your money on rent, but making your money productive. Investing it in something that is yours. There's information here on the blog. There's a good article on the real estate trends. Feel free to look at that. There's a lot more information on the topics here. But it's a buyer's market, and that's positive if you're into buying, which is different from a few years ago, where there was a market with an upward price trend. So think for a moment of someone that you can consider to be professionally and financially successful. You Everyone can imagine someone he or she knows. Imagine someone in your minds. Hmm? And then that person that you have in mind now, is that renting his or her property, or does that person own properties or a property? You don't need to give me the answer. This is just a reflection for yourself, the little exercise. Okay, and you might. So this might be people you know. This might be your parents. This might be people at work, etc. But it might be people that you take advice from. Maybe it's informal advice, but they might influence you as well. Okay. So when you buy, that is basically an opportunity to create wealth for you. If you rent, it's you help your landlord become richer. You create wealth for him and for his family. Um, a few basic reflections here. When you pay rent, so as probably most of you do at this point in time, and we go a little beyond the trivial arguments. Of course, we know renting, yeah, it gives you more flexibility, less commitments, also less rights, but it's maybe easy for the short term. That's not We're not going to talk about that in this webinar. But what rent doesn't give you is any guarantee on assets, on certainty for the future, or for the future beyond the current month. The rent gives you an apartment, a house for this month, and or till the end of your contract. You don't build up anything for the future. It also doesn't allow you to create a leverage on your savings. If you have a certain number of savings, 50k, 100,000 euro, um, by renting every month, you use some of that money. It goes to the landlord, and you can't increase that number of savings, at least not through property, right? So there is often a lower capacity to save, to build savings. Of course, expect if you have alternative investments, because there is obviously every case is specific. There might be reasons where you say, no, but I rent because I use my savings for maybe a business you're setting up, or some very specific investments that give a very high return, and that's worth more than, or that compensates the money that you pay for the rent. That's fine. But of course, when you own, you create that opportunity to increase your wealth, create wealth for you, for your family. You think about the future because you own a property, and that doesn't end at the end of this month. The rights in that property, they're there as long as you don't decide to sell the property, etc. It can generate future rental incomes, etc. So that's one of the initial reflections here. It helps you. If you buy, it can be a first step to financial independence. Really, you can look at it as maybe as a pension plan, instead of, or in addition to a pension plan. If you have a property, if you buy a property now when you're maybe 40 or 30 or 40 or 50, when you get older, maybe you live in another place and you rent out the place that you bought this year. So you get rental income. That's nice additional income for you and your family. It helps you to save. But when you buy, you typically, people, when they buy, they also buy a better property than the property they rent, because you can adjust it to your preferences. You can modify it, but you want to go a bit better, upgrade a bit. And if you want to buy a 250,000 euro property, you don't need today 250,000 euro. That's the benefit of using a bank. So, and mm, or you can also pay cash, of course, if you have the cash available. So let's look at some numbers. I hope you see this well on the screen. This is very basic, but this might be very insightful. Just look at first line. Imagine you share an apartment. You rent one room in an apartment. You're a young professional. You live in Barcelona, let's say, because a lot of people are from Barcelona here, and you pay 500 a month. That's 6,000 a year. And just assume midterm, 10 years. It's not too far from now, 2031. We're closer to 2031 than to the year 2000. So that would be 60,000 euro over 10 years that you pay on rent. Now that is if you rent a room, one room in an apartment. If a lot of people pay a rent around 1,000 euros a month, so that means 12,000 a year. That's the blue line. 120,000 over 10 years. That number starts to become quite significant. And then a lot of our customers as well, they are a bit older. They're maybe rather between 40 and 50 than between 30 and 40. They rent more expensive properties, sometimes uptown, sometimes in Borne or an Attica with a nice view. And they often pay 1,600, 1,800 euros a month for their property. So if you do that on over 10 years, you go up to 200,000 euro more or less in terms of rental cost. Right. These numbers are, as an illustration. They have not adapted them to like things for net present value or inflation. This is just to give you a rough idea of the ballpark figures of numbers, right, that we talk about. Now that's one thing, that is rent, but you need to compare this to your financial situation, to your income, basically. So the left table is the same here on the screen, but on the right, I've added another table. I need to organize my screen here. So here you see net income in the first column. And let's say the blue line again. Imagine your net income is 2,500 euros a month, means 30,000 per year, assuming 12 months, 12 payments. That's net. So it means gross you might have 50 or 60,000 euro gross salary. But what does that mean? That means if you buy this property which is €1,000. If you rent a property of 1,000 a month, and your income is 2,500 net a month, and you rent it for 10 years, you work 4 years. Your entire net income from 4 years is what you need to pay your landlord over a 10-year duration. Okay, and this might be the first time you look at renting or buying this way, and I want to challenge your thinking a little bit on this. But if your income is lower, even, of course, you pay during more years. If your income is higher, it's going to be maybe if you have 5,000 income or combined income net, it's only within 2 years. But still, it's still 2 years. But a lot of people are in this group as well, like 2,500, 3,000 euro, 4 years out of 10, meaning it's not half of the time, but it means that nearly 2 weeks per month you work for your landlords, right? So be mindful of that. That's something to keep in mind when you think of buying versus renting. Now, what could you do, or what could you buy if you have some savings? I said before, we see people start buying properties because it's feasible and the bank supports them financially. They give mortgages. Starting with savings around 45, sometimes 40, but 50, 55,000 euro. That's a fairly low number. So what can you buy with that? Because the number one question that everyone who is renting and wants to buy asks me is, I don't know if I can actually buy. I'm not sure if if what I want, if it exists, if the bank will finance me, in which if in this part of town I can buy what I would like to buy, if I can find my lifestyle in that part of town, etc. Second question is how to start, but the first question is what is possible. So okay, let me move ahead. If you, I got two examples. One is with if you have 60,000 euros on your bank account that you can use for purchasing a property. What can you do with that? So you can rent a property. We said that before. And when you rent a property at €1,000 a month, the example we used before, 5 years with 60,000 euro, you can rent it for 5 years, and then your 6,000 euro is gone. So that's good for the landlord, but it's no future value for you. You're not creating wealth. You're not building anything for the future. You can keep the money on your bank account. Of course, it's very easy, very traditional. Liquidity, easy accessible. You can use it tomorrow. But the banks in Spain are starting now to charge money to deposit, to charge a fee to deposit money in a bank account. Right? We started to see it a few weeks ago. So, and then even not counting on inflation, but every year you will have less money, less purchasing power if you keep the money on your bank account. Then we see lots of people say, no, but I invest in the stock market. I think the world will need petrol forever, so or oil forever, so I buy Repsol shares or Exxon shares, whatever. Okay, or investment funds. Fine, I'm okay with that. But you got to be aware the stock market is a lot more volatile than property market, has higher risk. Volatile means you can win a lot more, but you can also lose a lot more. So the question is then, if you have worked hard to gather your 60,000 savings, what risk do you want to take with that? Okay, and if you invest in the stock market, you can't buy the property. Again, the money is in the stock market, so they're mutually exclusive, of course. Now, if you buy a property, and here again we dive into some numbers, with 60,000, assuming the banks give you they finance between 60 and 80%. LTV means loan to value. That's the ratio banks use to decide how much money they can give you for a certain property or for your situation. So you got a property between 150,000 and 300,000 euro fairly easily with 60,000 euro of savings. Of course, assuming you have a stable income, you have a work contract, and you have these 60,000 euro savings, and a more or less normal spending profile. So no caprichos every week, because then the banks they get worried. That's a lot, huh? And you can even buy more. We're looking at a case now for a young, I think she's Monica, I think she's 36, international, living in Barcelona, working for an international company, around this amount of savings. And one of the banks say she can buy up to 400,000. That's a property purchase price, huh? The 400,000. That's big. Um, I'm not recommending her she needs to buy a 400k property, because that also means you have a higher monthly payback, of course, of your mortgage, so you know higher monthly obligations. But it means you have a lot of options. Mm. And that's called financial leverage. If you buy the property with a limited amount of savings, you can access something which is worth a multiple of that savings. That's because the banks give you the money. It's a multiplier. It creates a multiplier effect, basically. Uh, it will be your property. In Spain, the law says once it's your property, you can do whatever you want with the property. You can live there yourself. You can rent it out. You can leave it empty. You can sell it again. You decide. So it can generate your future income, future capital gains, maybe if you decide to sell it again. Now, an interesting thing here is if you let me explain this. So you see this multiplier effect. With 60,000, you can buy something which is a lot more expensive. Yes, you have interest costs of that. We come to that later, but they are very low. But if the alternatives, if you invest on the stock market, you can invest with 60,000. There's no way a bank is going to finance you to buy shares on the stock market or to invest in an investment fund. Then your maximum investment, your maximum value of the investment in at day one, will be 60,000. When you buy a property, your investment on day one is immediately 300,000 or 350 or 250, depends what you want to buy. That's this multiplier, which makes it very attractive. This you can do the same calculation if you have 100,000 savings, and if you rent a property, the same property at 1,000 per month, it means you have with 100,000 you can pay your rent for 8 years. Um, but here, this part, if you buy a property, you can of course access higher value or more expensive properties. Between 250, 500,000 euro, again, depending on the loan to value, um, or above 500,000 if you get more than 90% of the purchase price financed, and that is possible in Spain. That is possible, depends on your situation. In the webinar on mortgages, I talk a lot about that. What is important to qualify for a mortgage, um, but maybe in a nutshell. So stable income, work contract, which is often related to it. And then the banks make a difference between being a resident in Spain, a fiscal resident in Spain, or being a non-fiscal resident in Spain. Fiscal resident basically means where do you pay taxes. So if you're American and you work for an American company, but you work from Barcelona, but you make your income in dollars and you pay taxes, income tax in the US, you're fiscally non-resident, although you live here. Mm-hmm. If you're from Poland or from Brussels or uh, whichever part of the world, you live here, you work here for a local company, you pay your taxes here, you declare your taxes to Hacienda in Spain, you're a resident. You get standards around 80% loan to value from the banks. If you're non-resident, it's going to be rather 60, sometimes 70%. If you have a good profile doesn't mean you need to earn 10,000 euro per month, huh? But if you have stable income and so on and good contract and you work for a large company, stable company, so low risk for a bank, that's what the bank wants, low risk, 90% financing of the purchase price is possible. So that is the I hope this answers some of your questions. It's at least what a lot of people ask us in the initial meetings, like what is possible? Can I actually buy something? Mhm. Let's look at some examples because I'm talking here about money for a down payment, but how do you need to understand that? What does it exactly mean? Because yes, it's the money you need to put on the table. That's your part, the part that you put into a transaction. But how do banks look at that? What does it mean? And several examples here on the screen. Let's first look on the left side of the screen. Scenario 1 and 2 here. And I'm assuming that the bank does not finance your purchase tax. You know, there's a 10% purchase tax in Spain. 200,000 or 400,000, just two different models. It's a model we can play with. Assuming that you put 20% as a down payment, so 20% of 200,000 is 40,000 euro own funds, right? Meaning the mortgage needs to be 160. 160 plus 40 is 200,000, the property purchase price. You have your purchase tax, 10% on the official property value, so 20,000, and some costs, notary, land registry, maybe some work to be done by the notary's back office and so on, around 2,000 euro. That means your total savings that you will need are 62. That is a sum of 40,000, which is 20% of the purchase price, plus the 10% tax, plus around 2,000 euro for the costs. Okay. If any questions, please drop them in the chat. Huh? I will pause maybe after this slide, because otherwise, if you wait till the end, it might become difficult. The same if you were to buy a property of 400,000, the same mechanism. 20% is 80,000 euro. The cost, the notary, you'll need 122,000 euros. That is a standard answer from many banks in Spain if you are a resident here. If you're non-resident, change 20% down payment on funds by 40% or 30%, depends. Okay, so you need to bring in some more cash. That's the multiplier effect. But every bank is different, and I insist a lot in the mortgages webinar episode 3. Every bank looks different at your risk profile. Every bank has a preference for a certain type of customer. Some banks they have decided strategically they want to go for younger clients, so first-time buyers, because they know they might become a lifetime customer for many years. While other banks, they say we prefer actually to have more wealthier people, which might be less risky, and they can put a lot more savings into the transaction, etc. So every bank is different. If the bank purchases, if the bank finances your purchase cost and your purchase tax at 10%, and some banks do that, they might not tell you in the beginning because they are cautious to not over promise, or if they just finance a higher percentage, so above 80, above 90% of the purchase price, the numbers, the multiplier becomes impressive. And here you see, for 400,000, you can buy a 400,000 property, and this is a real example, an example from last week, with 59,000 euro of savings. Right? And here in the previous example, scenario 1, you needed around the same amount, 62, to buy a 200,000 property. That's another bank. Where's the difference? This bank here believes that the risk profile of this person is very good, so no, very low risk in transaction, and they finance this part here. They include the purchase costs, the tax, the costs into the mortgage. It means you need a lot less money suddenly, and they go for a higher loan to value percentage. You'll be asking, yeah, okay, but what does, there's a lot of numbers here, but it means that with 60,000 euro, with one bank, you might be able to buy up to 200,000, property of 200,000, or another bank up to 400,000. Of course, the monthly payback is going to be different. Interest rates might vary a bit between the banks, but in this example, the extreme, so the full leverage model from 59 to 400, if you would contract with a bank a variable interest rate, then you would have a Euribor plus 0.89 as an interest rate. Euribor is nearly minus 0.5, nearly, so you pay a very low interest rate, meaning you pay per month 1,227 euros in this model here, in this model. If you don't like variable interest rates, because they can go up, they are variable by definition. So if you don't like risk and you want to know exactly how much you're going to pay in the next 20 years, for instance, this is a simulation on 30-year mortgage. So for young professionals, a model where the interest rate is 20 years fixed at 2.09% and 10 years variable at the rate you mentioned before. And then your monthly payments go to 20 years fixed, every month exactly the same amount, 1,459. All right. So, and then it's the next step then is to look at how much can you afford based on your income. This is the stretch, the maximum. With what amount, with what monthly payback do you feel comfortable? Because you pay your property, we also have a lifestyle. You want to travel, maybe you want to buy stuff. So, but that is what is possible, right? These numbers here. I'm gonna take a quick look at the chat function just to see if there's any questions directly related to this here at this moment. Hold on. Okay, so the questions are for, we can cover them at the end, it's fine. Okay, then I'll keep going. One more thought on this. So the very first thing you've got to do when you're thinking of buying a property instead of renting a property is have the conversations with different banks. Um, a lot of people, they come to us and say, yeah, we've been searching for 6 months and it's frustrating. We don't find what we're looking for, and we visited some properties and no, it's not what we want. And then we liked something, but we weren't sure if you could buy it. No, that's the wrong order of things. The first thing to do is understand what is financially possible. We build models with our customers where we compare different banks, different options. What does it mean? How much can you afford? What does it mean in terms of monthly payback, in terms of other commitments the bank might request from you? So you know exactly what is possible. Then we look at what you feel comfortable with in terms of payback and so on. And then we start looking at properties, but not the other way around. And you need to talk to different banks. I think you've learned now why, because the banks are so different. And these are both our examples from the last 2 weeks, from for young international professionals, same profile of buyers. Okay. So in people that joined us in previous webinars, they have already taken decisions to stop wasting the money on rent and to buy their property. I'm going to show a few examples here, without going into detail, but just to tangibilize what is possible, because you might recognize yourself in some of these situations here. So I changed the names just to make it anonymous. So let's say this is Mike. Mike was renting mid last year. He was sharing a room so he had one room in a shared apartment, 550 euros per month. This is Barcelona center, Eixample. Um, he had some savings. He was around 55,000 euro savings available. He wanted some privacy. He was worried because of COVID, because the other people weren't respecting the rules, COVID rules, as much as he wanted to do that. He wanted to have something of himself, not paying the rent, etc., to the landlord. So what did you manage to do? In this case, we searched for the property as well. We found the property and helped him secure it, negotiate it, and buy it. So from one room in a shared apartment, he went to buying a 3-bedroom apartment, a small 3-bedroom with a 63 square meter, um, ready to move in. So in good conditions, so no extra costs needed. In Vallcarca. Okay, Vallcarca is not Eixample, it's a different part of Barcelona, but he valued the fact that it's more quiet there. There's more parks. It's still very well connected to the center, but with his budget, he could buy more property there, a bigger apartment, um, with some outside space and so on. His mortgage comes to 600 a month. It's a 30-year mortgage agreement at a 1.4 fixed interest rate. So it's never changing, his interest rate. That's very attractive. If you're slightly risk averse, you know exactly what it is. So in terms of financial payback every month, 550 versus 600, he was absolutely comfortable with that. He bought a property of 220,000 euro, which the bank valued at 230. We brought it down to 220 in the negotiation, and he needed 44,000 euro of his savings in total to cover everything. To cover the purchase price, the taxes, everything covered by that. Because he was a young buyer and he met certain conditions, he had a benefit in the tax. So the purchase tax was not 10%, but 5%. That's in Spain as well. So that's things we need to look at if you qualify for this tax reduction, which is 11 instead of 22,000 euros. It's half of it. It's a big difference. A question to you, or just think about this. This case, Mike. So he's now an owner of this apartment. what do you think? Does it cost him a little bit more than renting? So 600 versus 550? Or do you think, no, he's actually saving a lot of money? Or you say, well, I'm not really sure how to compare these things. Um, we don't need to answer this online here, but just a reflection for you. So a lot of people say 600 is a bit more than 550. So for a little bit more, it costs him a little bit more, but he owns an apartment. That's not exactly right, or not exactly the right way to look at it. Why is that? Because you own an apartment. You have something in exchange. What you shall look at is the costs of renting, which is money that is gone, doesn't give you anything future beyond the end of the month, versus the cost of your mortgage, the cost of buying, because the cost of buying is basically the interest rate. Later we talk about other buying related costs. Okay, um, and then you see in this case with his monthly mortgage payment of 600, how does that break down? 400 is capital and 200 is interest rate in year one. In year one, the interest rate is, in the first year, the interest rate is the highest because you have the largest outstanding capital. So the cost actually is 200 because he has the property on his name and he can sell that tomorrow. He can rent it tomorrow. So there's a saving of 350 per month. I know you pay, as an owner, you have obligations. You pay city tax, you need to pay a notary when you buy a property, you need to pay your contribution, if it's an apartment, at least to the condominium, for the maintenance of the building and the cleaning and so on. Um, so that's one way to to look at the numbers. Look at the interest rate, don't just think like, okay, buying is a higher monthly cost, because that's not the right comparison. Two more examples. Giuseppe, Italian buyer, young professional working for an international company here, um, was renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Barcelona, and he paid 700. So his own apartment, not sharing. He paid 700. Uh, he bought a 2-bedroom, but with some outside space, with balcony, 64 square meters, uh, for 177,000 euro. This needed some renovation, because sometimes a good deal, you might buy something really cheap, and the cost of buying the property plus the renovation actually is lower than what you would pay for a finished property. And actually, in his mortgage, he pays 600 a month now compared to 700 rent before. So even though that's not the right way to look at savings, in terms of cash out, because that is the right metric, cash out on a monthly basis, it's 600 versus 700 in the past. But what does he have? What does he get? And he wrote this sentence here, said it's a huge difference. I'm doing an investment for my future. I avoid having savings with no ROI. And in terms of sentiment, and social and activities related to his lifestyle, I'm super happy. The flat is totally renovated now according to his preferences, his style. A renovation which took about a month. It was not a full renovation, so we helped him with that part as well, but with the planning of the renovation to give him get him in touch with builders and so on. So that's another example. Here's another example of there was a couple, an English couple. Uh, she they decided they were renting him a nice property in Bordenay in Barcelona, 1,300 a month, and decided to buy. They wanted something of their own. They were expecting a baby. They have a baby in the meanwhile. So she was pregnant during the property visits. Um, in this case, we searched as well for the property, showed them the selection of best of the market, and we found an apartment with 3 bedrooms, a lot lighter, brighter, more spacious and quieter than the Born apartment, more livable long term, as they call it themselves, and a mortgage is 795 a month. Again, a 30-year duration, because the buyers were like in their 30s. What property do you buy? 240,000 euro approximately, with a down payment of 55,000 euro. So you see these ratios um, come back, and with a fairly limited amount of savings, you can access properties that are significantly better than the properties that those people were renting before. At this very moment, we are talking with working with not Italian girl, Aurora. She's similar profile in terms of available savings. We're hopefully signing this week, tomorrow or Thursday, her purchase commitment contract, the ARAS contract for her property for around the 170,000 euro apartment. But it's an apartment It's in Guinardó, so a little bit away from the center, but she likes it. The fact that it's more quiet, but with a terrace, and she sees the sea view from her terrace. Right. So, and she was crying when we called her that we found this apartment and we thought we could secure it for her, and she could never imagine uh, a month ago, 2 months ago, that this would be possible. And so the market today offers cheaper properties. The banks offer cheaper interest rates, and then if we can help you get the best properties and negotiate harder. So these things are. I hope these numbers uh, help you visualize, tangibilize what is possible. So this is a comparison renting versus owning. I said before, there is of course costs related to owning a property. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, um, because there's different types of costs. I've taken an example of a 300,000 euro property, but you can do this for any type of property. The purchase tax 10% by default. Again, if you meet certain criteria in terms of age and income and so on, you might pay 5% instead of 10% property purchase tax. So that's an extra saving you can achieve. The notary cost, the land registry, the registration, around 2,000 euro, approximately 1,800, 2,500, depends a bit, but it's nearly neglectable costs in the bigger picture. These are one-off costs. You pay them when you buy the property or in the weeks after you buy the property. Okay. As an owner, you have obligations. The tax administration. Um, so you pay city tax. For this type of property, the city tax, there's no single formula to determine city tax in Spain. It depends on the village, but even in Barcelona, it depends on the street you live in, huh? And on the type of property, of course, on the size and so on. Between 280 and 500 euros a year annually. So that's relatively small numbers. You need a house insurance, which you might not need, or you do need sometimes when you rent a property. Around 250, between 200 and 300, you have most standard house insurances, and you pay your contribution to the condominium, to the community of owners, the comunidad, as they say in Spanish. And that can be very diverse. This discussed here. There is communities where you pay 300 uh, a year that are very small apartments at very average locations. There is places where you pay 800 a year for really nicer properties and nicer buildings, well maintained. That costs of the community covers maintenance of standard maintenance of the building, uh, twice a week cleaning of the stairs, an elevator, the light, the insurance of the building, not your property, the building, maintaining the roof. That is what this costs represents here. Okay. And then there is potential costs. If you take a mortgage, of course, you pay interest rates. The bank might require you to take a life insurance. That's costs that depend on your situation. But again, we've looked at the interest rates before, at examples before, so you can get an idea. Um, most buyers today, they get interest rates anything between 1.2% and 2.2% fix. Mhm. Why is the range so large? Because the banks look at, as I said before, look at your profile, your savings, your income, your spending profile, and so on. So, your residency status, and so on. So, and then additional costs that can happen if you buy a property for renovation. You need to budget for that, because be mindful, the bank typically doesn't finance renovations. Some banks do, but it's more complicated. They need to work with their builders, and I don't like that idea too much. So it means you need to, if you have, let's say, 80,000 euro savings or 100,000 euro savings, make sure that the bank finances a high loan to value percentage. You lose not your 80,000, you use not 80,000, you use maybe 50,000. You buy the property, you have another 30 for the renovations, for instance. Or you can buy and you can renovate it if it's good to live in, at this point. Maybe you renovate in a few years when you know the property better, and you have some more money saved. And there's potential cost of, if you work with a buyer agent to help you plan properly, be realistic, find properties, the lawyer, the architect, and so on. That's a cost, but again, this is neglectable compared to the bigger picture, and that's the cost that pays itself back. So, how to get started? We come to the end of my part here. Um, all the examples that I've talked about were all people that were on the Metropolitan Inspire webinars in the last few months. And there is a lot more stories. Um, if you go to our YouTube channel, and Jeff, you can maybe drop this link in the chat box here, or we send it afterwards, but let's share it. They tell their stories in 2-3 minute videos. But a few months ago, they weren't sure if they could buy. They weren't sure about the financing, what is possible, and typically they think financing is rather restricted or restrictive, and they can buy often uh, a lot better properties than what they expected. So that's typically a positive surprise when we run that exercise with them. Which areas? Actually, international people living in Spain, we've realized that they're not good at knowing different areas. So people live in a place where they rent a property and they know that area very well. That's where they live. The lifestyle is in that area. Um, but when they buy, that's the first area they think of is where they live. But they don't know the other areas of town sufficiently well to decide if they would be willing to live there. Mhm. And that's surprising because it takes us a lot of work to run through different areas in town or outside town, and help people come to like a conclusion of which areas are in scope or out of scope for their purchase, because prices depend heavily on location and everywhere, but certainly in cities like Barcelona. So sometimes by moving a little bit, so typical example, my kids go to the lycée français and therefore I want to live close to Avenida Saria, right? Therefore you pay a premium. It's one of the most expensive parts of town. But if you go a little bit further down and you go just below Diagonal, you go into a Champla, right? You have excellent public transport connections to the French school. Um, or you can go by car very easily. So the connection is very, very good, but property prices drop significantly compared to the areas closer to the Lycée Français. So instead of your 15 or 20-minute walk to school, maybe it's a 15 or 20-minute bus ride to school. Uh, but that might allow you to buy a property with an extra bedroom if you have two kids, to have to give them each their independent bedroom, for instance. And that's things we discuss in these initial workshops. Then because otherwise we see people searching in a certain direction and buy something which is probably suboptimal, and they might regret later. Right? we I like to use this I call it the buyer equalizer. We spend a lot of time talking about building a realistic balance and realistic expectations between your budget, the property you want, how big, how beautiful, how modern, how many bedrooms, terrace, yes or no, property features, and locations. And you can't have everything in theory. If location for you is important, you want to be next to the French school. If you want to pull that lever up, you will have to go down on property features or go up with your budget on price, right? Otherwise, it won't work anymore. All right. So how to get started? And that's a summary then. First is not searching properties. First is, what are my possibilities? If you want, you tell me, we sent you an email after, you tell us what you're looking for, what your dream property is, and without any commitment, I'll give you my opinion and say if I think it's possible, it's realistic, does it exist in Barcelona, or what I would do in your case. Second step is, assuming it's realistic or you're willing to adjust some parameters, some expectations, mortgage simulations. Talk to different banks. You can do that. We can do that for you. We can do it together as you prefer. Then workshop, sit together, look at examples on screen, pros and cons, understand priorities in your mind for property, for lifestyle, what is important to you. If you don't get step 1, 2, and 3 right, you never find a good property. It will be suboptimal. You pay too much. You could have bought something better. You might regret in the future. And then step 4 is how you go about searching the property. We can coach you on how you search better, what to watch out for. We discuss properties with you. Or some clients say, no, Inspire, please search for me, show me the best of the market. Also find off-market properties. I want to see them as well. So that's our job. We can do that. It depends what the buyer wants. Then we start look at properties together. And then, of course, communication. We need to talk a lot, because you cannot have one workshop and then suddenly black box and then here's a property. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. There is nearly daily communication with each of our clients, our buyers, um, because to adjust expectations further, to adjust the target definition better, to come to that dream property. So if you're thinking of stop renting and own a property, this is the first step. Could you tell us what you have in mind. In the follow-up email after the webinar, you will find a link where you can send us your wish list of property features. And we're on top of the hour here. It's 7 p.m. So before we open up for questions, maybe a question to you again. We do this at every webinar when we launch a poll on the screen again. Was this helpful? Um, you came to you spend an hour of your evening after probably a full day at work being in webinars already or in Zoom meetings. So it's great that you're still here, and I see we have more people now than the beginning of the webinar, so it's great. So it takes me always quite some time to prepare these things, of course. So I'd love to hear your feedback as well. You'd see a pop-up. So how would you rate a webinar from 1 to 10? 10 being very inspirational. Okay. So we leave this on the screen for a minute or so people can respond to this. What I will do is, if you have, and we open up for questions now, what can you do next besides what we discussed? If you want to know how we can support you, then it's very simple. You just write me an email or you fill in the form that you get per email afterwards after the webinar. So that means if some people call us after the webinar, say, I've seen this property, I want to buy this property, I'm about to make an offer, or I made an offer, or I made a reservation already, but help me buy it, take out the risk, make sure everything is okay, fine. Or you can say, I'm thinking I want to start searching, help me get going and help me find better properties. So we can discuss that. If you just want to stay informed and know more about the property markets, register for the property series. There's a lot more coming, or rewatch or watch again the previous ones on the mortgages and the process, the COVID impact, the dilemmas, and so on. There's a lot of articles again on our website. We publish quite some stuff on Facebook and on my personal LinkedIn profile as well. So feel free to follow us there and connect. All right. So if someone wants to vote still for or share his or her opinion on the webinar, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we will close the. You don't see this, but I can say that it's. You want to close it, Jeff? Yeah. So the majority gave us a 10 out of 10 score. So thank you very much for that. That's good to hear. And the minimum score was an 8. So thank you. I'm glad you found it helpful. Here is the upcoming webinars. So let me go and look at the questions. I see. Yeah, I forgot. There's another poll coming up on the screen. Yeah. So why today do you doubt making the switch from renting to buying? And this is a multiple choice question, of course. And maybe based on the answers, this might drive some interesting questions for the Q&A now. So it can be maybe you need some more savings, or you're on a temp work contract, which happens a lot with international people who come here or who switch job. And then many times when you switch job, the new company, they might not tell you, but when you read the contract carefully, there's a 3 or 6 months trial period, and the banks, they don't find them. They're very reluctant to finance if you're in a trial period, because it might mean that you're without any compensation, you don't get a permanent contract in a few months from now. So that's important. You can compensate this by getting a letter from your employer sometimes, where they say that there's a clear intention to turn your temp contract into a permanent contract. Some banks are okay with that, but then they need to see something written and stamped by the company. So here we see the majority. A lot of people say I don't have a permanent work contract. I don't dare to make the switch, to make mistakes. That is important in Spain. For those people who wrote of making mistakes, look at the other webinars. I think probably the episode 1 and 2 is probably, or maybe 2 is the best one, where we talk about the process and everything that can go wrong in Spain because things are um, not regulated. Um, I don't know. A lot of people say as well, I don't know if what I want is within my reach. This is the number one thing we normally see. Okay, and a final one, and then there's no more questions, and afterwards from our end, and it's your time. Um, has this webinar changed your opinion? Has this clarified some of your doubts in terms of, we asked initially, you rather inclined towards renting or keep renting versus maybe buying, or you don't know yet? So we'll leave this on here. I'm going to open up the Q&A chat box here in the meanwhile. And I'm going to go to the question, just top through bottom. First question, first come, first serve. So someone says here, I'm just reading it as I see it in front of me. And oh, sorry, my screen, the chat box is gone. Yeah, there you are. I'm a physical resident and I have a 4-year work contract with a Spanish employer. Is this a stable work contract worthy of a mortgage, or would I only be approved with an indefinite contract? Good question, and it's one of these situations which happen. So every case is different. Banks prefer indefinite, but it doesn't have to be indefinite. They will look at your profile, so your income, your savings, what type of property you want to buy. So it's certainly worth speaking to the banks, different banks, and ask them to run a simulation. And in my opinion, a simulation is good, but I always like to have pre-approvals. So not just because the banks, what they always do, and I hate it when people, when you go to your bank, to their office, and you say, do I qualify for a mortgage? Well, they say, don't worry, you're a good customer. When you find the property, come to us and we give you the exact proposal. And a lot of people relax and say, my bank said it's okay. That's not okay. The banks do that because that's not a pre-approval. That's a way to avoid that you go to other banks, and that's a way so that once you find a property, you go to them, and then you want to buy quickly because good properties sell quickly, and then you don't have time to go and compare other banks. So I don't like that approach. I want to see pre-approvals from banks before you start searching for properties, because that will give us the maximum power in the negotiation, in providing arguments to the selling party that you're the right type of buyer and we want to pay a lower price for the property, or have certain other conditions, right? So Chris, certainly try it, and happy to get you in touch with some banks if you want to, or with some senior contacts at banks at you if you want to. Up to what age are people considered young in order to have 5% purchase tax? I think it's, we have a fiscal expert in our team. I think it's 33 or 34. Uh, but it's not just age, huh? It's age, and there's an income limit as well, and some other requirements you need to meet. Okay. I see Jeff have posted a video in here as well, where some of the, well, where people from previous webinars of Metropolitan share their experience with you. So feel free to look at that. Another question: the prices mentioned in the example shown seem a lot lower than those advertised on Fotocasa Idealista. Do you have to negotiate to reduce the price? Yes. Also, I have heard that a lot of properties in Barcelona suffer from issues like with albinosis, cement. How much of a problem is this? Okay, so that's two questions. One is, you need to negotiate. Yes, this is very different from, we had a discussion yesterday, I believe, with someone from the Netherlands. I said, well, in Netherlands, if you have a property with a certain value, a market value, you put it at the market more or less for that value. You don't increase the value by a big number. In Spain, some people do. You can do that, and people do it. They try it. There's no general rule. Some properties are priced very aggressively, very sharp, meaning negotiation power is virtually zero, and the property will sell within a few days. And we recommend our buyers then buy, because this will, everything is, due diligence is all good, everything is green, legally, financially, technically. This will sell very quickly. It's at or below market price, and some properties you need to negotiate a lot on. Um, and yeah, you also need to know when to walk away from a property, because if the price is inflated, it's not because you can bring it down by 20,000 or 30,000 that you suddenly have a good price, because maybe it's just not a good property and it's still overvalued. So these cases exist. So that's where we run our own valuation appraisal of apartments when people are thinking of buying them. We use big data tools in the same way banks value properties. And then we plus the experience day to day of demand and supply in the market, who wants to pay what for certain properties, to know if it's good. Is this good value for money, or is it just too expensive? And sometimes we walk away and that's it. And sometimes the seller comes back 2 months later, says, hey, if you're still interested, I'm happy to, I think I understood your arguments, but maybe a bit too late, but I'm happy to reduce my price to the offer you made. That happens as well quite often. Second part of your question, Jerry, yes, there is properties with technical problems. There is a lot of them. Um, for instance, we're doing a transaction we're looking at now for an international buyer. It's a very good property. Uh, our architect has seen it. It has been negotiated. The contract is ready for signature. And one of the conditions in the contract is that we will run a technical test, a sample, to an analytics on aluminosis, which is kind of a structural weakness of cement, which happens in some properties that have been built in the 70s or so, more or less, and that can affect the structure, and that's not a good thing if that happens. It doesn't mean the property will fall apart. It just means that over time, in a simplified way, cement turns into sand, kind of. But that's a simplified. That's how an economist would explain it, but an architect would explain it quite differently, I guess. So yes, it is a problem. That's why we do technical inspections. That's why we certify what we see technically, and that's why we use what we see technically in the negotiation and in the contracts. Because if you don't do that, you're not protected. Uh, Another question. What about your support for and knowledge for buying houses out of Catalonia? Feeling you are mainly specialized in Barcelona. What about Andalusia? So in this webinar, I talked basically about Barcelona because it's organized by Barcelona Metropolitan, which is a main focus on the international community here in and around Barcelona/Catalonia. We help buyers across most of Spain being the big cities and the coast. The coast, Costa Brava, Costa Blanca, Costa del Sol, the Murcia part. That's where most foreign buyers are. These customers are typically customers who don't live here yet. They live in France, in Germany, in the UK, in Belgium, Netherlands, and they want to buy Switzerland, and they wanna buy a property there, a place to live. We have now someone who wants to sign something, a property in the next. We're on it now in the very south of Spain, close to Malaga, a bit more inland. We do new developments, we support new developments. We can follow up renovation project or developments in the coast. So you can certainly do that. Feel free to reach out after the webinar and we can discuss. Are there gated communities in Catalonia, and would this protect me from Ocupas? This is the only thing holding me back as an apartment. Will be empty a lot throughout the year. It's a holiday home. But yeah, there are of course gated communities. So there's different things here. Yes, there are gated communities. Of course, depends where. If you want to be on the coast and you have like a project was developed with 40 apartments and with a common garden and there's a gate around it. Yes. The problem of Ocupas exists. There's also, I think, an interesting article on Metropolitan. I don't know who wrote it, but it's on their website about what you can do if there's Ocupas. We see the Ocupa situation. We've not seen it with any of our clients, happily so far. We've not seen it with any of our own properties. It's easier that those people occupy properties that are owned by banks because they know that the bank is not going to be there tomorrow. They know that the bank is reacting very slowly, that the owner is anyway not engaged anymore with the property. So that's easier, but it's a situation that exists, and also why the politicians are now working on ways to, well, let's see if they agree, to find ways to give an answer to this from a legal point of view as well. Okay. What a lot of people do is you have now very inexpensive alarm systems which you can control yourself through video cameras and so on, through phone apps. You can have a standard alarm costs around 40 euros a month, more or less, for a standard system. When you have security people going check the property if the alarm goes off, so there is ways to protect you as well, of course. Renting it out when you're not there is not an option when somebody's living there. Another question: we are both independent, so no fixed salary. What will the bank say? We think about a bed and breakfast. Banks prefer indefinite contracts, ideally from large employers. Banks also finance people that are independent. It depends if you can demonstrate recurring income. That is what the bank look at. They might lower the percentage, the loan to value percentage a bit. So they might not. I don't think they will go to 90% financing. They might be rather 60, 70%. But again, it depends on your numbers, on your financials. I don't think they will say no. Uh, Second part of the answer is you say you think about a bed and breakfast. Um, when you buy something which is not going to be your primary residence, the banks will also be more cautious and probably lower the loan to value percentage. So you might rather end up around 60 than 70 or 80%. Certainly worth a try, and I think just be transparent with the banks in terms of what your situation is, and ask different banks in this case. I think it's potentially even worth going maybe through one of the good brokers, because they can speak to many different banks, and for these type of situations that might be helpful. And some brokers, the good ones, they don't charge for this, so there's no additional costs involved. Is there a place I can see the most concentrated areas of Okupas? Is there a map? Not that I'm aware of. But, maybe it exists, but uh, might be there. I think I'm through all questions, but please wait. I think there's um, another question. Is there a difference in mortgage interests, so interest rates, I guess, for a home or a second property? Yes, sometimes. So I think the difference is going to be more in the percentage loan to value and not that much in the interest rates. So I'm thinking now of situations where we looked at this. No, I think it's more the loan to value. I wouldn't expect interest rates to be different. No. So again here, uh, different banks, many simulations. That's the most important thing, because they're so diverse, and you might be surprised by what some banks are willing to do versus what other banks are. There's some banks, and they say because of policy, they do not finance residents from certain countries, where people that live in certain countries and make their income in certain local currencies. Hmm? Israel, Australia, India, the US, some South American countries. They're on the list, and some banks perceive that as a higher risk, because if your income is another currency, there is a risk, because your mortgage commitment is in euros, right? So therefore they say by policy, by strategy, we don't do it. So um, talk to them, Andrew. It's okay. So not sure if there's more questions. Do you want to see the story of the people from the previous webinars? It's 2.5 minutes. It's up to you. Yeah, I see Victor is in. I'll play it. Please, Victor, make that sign again to make sure that you hear the audio when I play it.
No.
And I wouldn't really know what steps to follow to make it a reality.
It's a no-brainer. We had a really great experience. When we first talked about it, we debated whether or not we would get value from the services. But after just one meeting, it was clear that that the people at Inspire are experts in their field. I think that's the most important thing.
Well, it's just been nice to have the feedback on the viewings, because sometimes we would go to a viewing and think, yeah, this is great, but then we're like, oh, wonder what Anna thinks. So then Anna would come back with, hey, have you checked this or something? Or I know this company, have you done this or this?
So I really recommend you guys to at least have a look with this agency in case you would like to buy an apartment. Do a conversation with them, and you will notice already for the first step that they're very kind and they are very expert to explain you everything in the process.
If you buy in Barcelona, you need to find the property. You have all the things with the lawyer and the notary. Then there were the renovations were still being completed. All of that Inspire Boutique Apartments would take care of. So from all these points, I think I would never have been able to do that on my own.
Since we chose the apartment, the actual process of getting everything sorted, I mean, I don't think we could, there's just no way we could have done it on our own, I don't think.
I would not have known at all, and now I know better than back then, what to do step by step and what has to be done to avoid the dangers that occur.
And I think really for us, the thing that came across was that they were able to challenge some of our assumptions or opinions. So there were a lot of things that we learned along the way, even small things. And that gave us the confidence, I think, as we move through the entire process.
I had to be in contact with the bank. I need to be in contact with the agency, and doing all these papers that was quite complex. And Inspire Boutique was managing everything on my behalf. So really, I didn't do any activities, extra activities. Just follow up with them in the process.
It's been pretty stress-free, so it's been great. Yeah. Thank you.
So for us, it was a really good experience. The communication was very clear. We had a WhatsApp group going, which meant that we could ask questions back and forth.
I speak Spanish, but nowhere near good enough to sort of navigate a lot of these processes. I mean, even in English, these things are complicated.
We know the language, we know some, stuff, but still, we've learned a lot, I think.
Yeah, so definitely
it's been interesting.
A thumbs up.
Thumbs up, thank you very much.
All right. So these stories from real people from previous webinars, and they made the switch, stopped renting, are owning their property, and are living there now, or renting it out. It was a mix here of people. So if any further questions, I'll quickly I see there's another question. Can I get a mortgage and then pay down with the proceeds of another property sale at a later date? Yes. Again, depends on the situation, but yes, there is banks that finance a purchase of property A, and some of the funds need to come from the sale of property B, your existing property. Property should be in Spain, ideally. You need to bridge that time gap, that's time you need to get the property sold. There's typically a maximum number of months on the for you to sell the property, but it's quite significant. I've seen these things be a year or more sometimes. So it can, but depends where the property is, and the bank will also then value that other property to see if it's how it works. The other option is, if you don't sell the property, maybe you can have a new mortgage or an incremental mortgage on the existing property and use that money as a down payment for the new property. So there's different ways to do this. This is easier to if you take a mortgage on existing property. That doesn't have to be in Spain. If you're in the UK or in France, Germany, wherever, you can finance there. That's okay then. Then in Spain, it's considered a cash purchase, or at least that part is considered down payment, like a cash down payments. That's free. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. You will get the email. Feel free to get in touch with us. Thanks for your feedback, and I look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good evening. Thanks, Victor, for hosting this. You're mute, Victor.